There is an old warning that people who live near forests often pass down through generations. A rule so simple, yet so terrifying. If you ever find yourself walking alone in the woods, and suddenly you hear someone call your name from behind you, do not answer. Do not stop. And whatever you do, never look back. Because some voices in the forest don't belong to the living. And once you turn around, you may never find your way out again. Tonight's story is called Never Look Back When Someone Calls Your Name in the Forest. Chapter 1. The Road into the Forest. People in the village had a saying that everyone knew, but no one liked to explain. If you hear someone call your name in the forest, never look back. It was not written anywhere. No sign warned travelers. No book recorded the rule. Yet everyone who had lived near the northern forest long enough knew it by heart. Parents whispered it to their children. Hunters repeated it before entering the trees. And the old people always said it with the same quiet seriousness that made the air feel colder. Min first heard the warning when he was 10 years old. That night, the sky above the village was dark and cloudless. The wind carried the smell of wet soil from the distant hills. Min sat on the wooden steps of his grandfather's house, swinging his legs while watching the shadows grow longer across the fields. In the distance stood the northern forest. Even from far away it looked strange. The trees were taller than any others around the village, packed tightly together like a wall. Their branches tangled into a thick black mass that swallowed the fading light of evening. No one from the village liked walking near it after sunset. Min's grandfather sat beside him in an old bamboo chair, slowly smoking his pipe. His face was deeply lined, the kind of face carved by years of wind, rain, and quiet memories. For a long time he said nothing. His eyes simply rested on the forest. Finally, he spoke. "If you ever walk in that forest," the old man said slowly, "and you hear someone call your name, do not turn around." Min frowned, confused. "Why?" he asked. "Is there a ghost in there?" The old man did not answer immediately. The pipe smoke drifted upward between them, thin and pale in the moonlight. After a moment, he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. Min blinked. "Then what is it?" The old man's eyes remained fixed on the dark line of trees far away. For a brief moment, something passed across his expression, something like fear. "It's not a ghost," he said. His voice dropped lower, almost like he was afraid the forest itself might hear him. And that's what makes it worse. The wind rustled through the grass around the house, but the forest remained still, unnaturally still, as if it were listening. Min looked toward it again. For some reason, the trees seemed darker than before. Chapter 2. The Forest Without Birds. 20 years later, Min returned to the village. Time had changed many things. The dirt road that once led through endless rice fields was now cracked and narrow. Several houses had been abandoned, their wooden walls leaning slightly as if tired of standing. The village felt smaller than he remembered, quieter too. But the forest was still there, standing in the exact same place at the northern edge of the village. And somehow, it looked even darker. Min stepped out of the small bus carrying only a backpack and a camera case. He had spent years working as a journalist, traveling from place to place, investigating strange stories and forgotten legends. Most of them turned out to be exaggerations or old rumors that had grown larger over time. But the story of the forest had always stayed in his mind. The warning his grandfather gave him that night had never left. If someone calls your name, don't look back. Min stood at the edge of the village road and looked toward the trees. From afar, the forest looked like a giant shadow pressed against the horizon. The trees grew thick and tall, their branches tangled together like claws. Sunlight barely reached the ground beneath them. But what disturbed Min the most was not how the forest looked. It was how it sounded. Or rather, how it didn't. There were no birds flying above the trees. No insects humming in the air. No distant rustling of animals moving through the undergrowth. The forest was completely silent. Min had visited many forests before during his travels, and every forest had a voice of its own, chirping birds, buzzing insects, leaves whispering in the wind. But this place had none of that. The silence here felt heavy, unnatural, as if something inside the forest had swallowed every sound. A cold breeze passed over the road, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and old wood. Min suddenly felt the strange sensation that someone was watching him from within the trees. Not just one pair of eyes. Many, hidden deep inside the darkness between the trunks. For a moment, he remembered his grandfather sitting beside him on the porch all those years ago, staring at the same forest with the same quiet expression. Min tightened his grip on the strap of his bag. Whatever the truth behind the legend was, he had come back to find it. And the forest was waiting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Hunter Who Never Came Back the Same. Min spent the afternoon walking through the village, asking quiet questions about the forest. Most people avoided the topic. Some pretended they had never heard the old warning. Others simply shook their heads and told him it was better not to dig into things that had already taken enough from the village. But one person agreed to talk. An old hunter named Fuck. Everyone said Fuck was the last man who still dared to enter the northern forest. His small wooden house stood near the edge of the village, the closest house to the tree line. Animal traps hung from the wall outside, rusted and unused. The smell of strong rice wine drifted from the doorway. When Min arrived, Fuck was sitting alone on a low stool, slowly pouring himself another cup. The old hunter studied Min carefully before speaking. "You're the grandson of Old Khan, aren't you?" he said. Min nodded. Fuck sighed and leaned back, staring toward the forest beyond the fields. "Your grandfather was a smart man," he muttered. "He knew when to stay away." Min sat across from him and placed his recorder on the table. "I came here to understand what's really in that forest." Fuck gave a dry laugh. "People who want answers from that place rarely like what they find." For a long time he said nothing, swirling the wine in his cup. The evening sun was fading, and the forest in the distance slowly turned into a dark silhouette against the sky. Finally, the old hunter spoke again. 10 years ago, Fuck said quietly, 3 of us went into the forest to hunt." Min leaned forward slightly. "We had gone in dozens of times before. We knew the paths, the streams, every clearing. Nothing unusual happened that day. We set traps, checked our rifles, and built a small fire before night came." Fuck's voice slowed. But after midnight, we heard it. Min felt a chill run through him. Heard what? Fuck looked at him, his eyes suddenly very serious. A voice. The old hunter placed his cup down carefully on the table. It called a name. Fuck lowered his voice almost to a whisper. Nam. Min frowned. One of the men with you? Fuck nodded. It sounded exactly like Nam's younger sister. Soft, familiar, like she was just a few steps away behind the trees. Min swallowed. What did he do? Fuck's jaw tightened. At first, none of us moved. We all remembered the old rule. Everyone in this village knows it. He paused. But the voice called again. The old hunter slowly turned his head, as if remembering the moment. Nam. Fuck's fingers trembled slightly. And this time, Nam turned around. Silence filled the room. Min waited. What happened next? He asked quietly. Fuck looked toward the forest again. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he spoke. The next morning, Fuck said slowly, we found him standing alone between the trees. Min felt his stomach tighten. He was alive? Yes. But something was wrong. Fuck's voice became hoarse. Nam was standing perfectly still. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't looking at us. The old hunter's hands gripped the edge of the table. He just kept whispering the same thing over and over. Fuck stared straight at Min. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. Chapter 4. The Old Legend. That night, Min couldn't stop thinking about what the hunter had told him. Nam had turned around. And something in the forest had changed him forever. The village grew quiet after sunset. Only a few dim lights glowed through the wooden windows of scattered houses. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Min sat inside the small guest room he had rented and listened to the wind outside. His recorder rested on the table beside his notebook. The forest stood only a few hundred meters away, hidden beyond the darkness of the fields. He decided to ask one more person about the legend. An old woman named Ba Lan. Everyone in the village said she was the oldest living resident. She had lived there longer than anyone else could remember. And if the story of the forest truly had deep roots, she would know them. Her house stood near the center of the village, crooked and weathered with age. The wooden door creaked when Min pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dried herbs and old paper. Ba Lan sat near a dim oil lamp, her thin hands resting on a woven blanket. Her hair was completely white, and her eyes looked cloudy with age. But when she saw Min enter, they sharpened slightly. "You're asking about the forest," she said before Min could speak. It wasn't a question. Min nodded. "Yes." The old woman sighed slowly, as if the topic itself carried a weight she had carried for decades. "That story is older than this village," she said. Min turned on his recorder. Ba Lan leaned back in her chair and stared into the flickering lamplight. "More than 100 years ago," she began, "a group of woodcutters went into that forest. 5 men in total. They planned to stay for 3 days and cut timber near the northern hills." Her voice remained steady, but something in her tone made the room feel colder. On the second night, they heard a child crying. Min felt a small chill crawl down his spine. "A child?" he asked. Ball Lan nodded slowly. A little girl's voice. The old woman looked at him carefully. They said it sounded like the child was lost somewhere in the trees behind them. Min already knew what was coming next. One of the men turned around. Ball Lan paused. Then she continued. Then another. And another. Only one of them remembered the rule. Only one man kept walking forward without looking back. Her wrinkled fingers tightened slightly on the blanket. He ran all the way out of the forest before sunrise. Min leaned forward. What about the others? For a moment, Ball Lan didn't answer. The oil lamp flickered. Finally, she spoke. The next morning, he returned with people from the village to search for his friends. The old woman's voice became almost a whisper. They found them standing between the trees. Min's heart began to pound. Standing perfectly still. Her cloudy eyes met Min's. But their bodies were facing forward. She paused. And their heads. The flame of the oil lamp trembled slightly. Were turned completely backward. Silence filled the room. Somewhere far away, the forest waited in the darkness. Evergreen tree.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The first step into the forest. The next morning, the village looked almost peaceful. Sunlight spread across the rice fields, and a thin layer of mist slowly lifted from the ground. Chickens wandered between houses, and a few villagers quietly began their daily routines. But beyond the last row of houses, the forest remained the same. Dark. Still. Watching. Min stood at the northern edge of the village road with his backpack resting against his shoulder. Inside were only a few things: a camera, a voice recorder, extra batteries, a flashlight, a notebook, and a small folding knife. He had prepared for many investigations before, but this one felt different. He looked toward the forest again. In daylight, the trees appeared even taller than they had the night before. Their trunks rose like black pillars, packed tightly together. The deeper parts of the forest looked almost completely black, as if sunlight refused to enter. Min remembered the words of the old hunter. People who want answers from that place rarely like what they find. He took a slow breath. Then he stepped forward. The moment Min crossed the invisible line where the trees began, something changed. The air felt cooler, heavier, almost damp, like the inside of a cave. The sounds of the village disappeared behind him within seconds. No distant voices, no animals, no wind brushing through the leaves. Only silence. Min paused and looked around. The ground beneath his boots was covered with layers of fallen leaves that had turned dark and soft with age. Strange roots twisted across the soil like frozen snakes. The smell of wet wood filled the air. He turned on his recorder. Day 1, Min said quietly, entering the northern forest. His voice sounded strangely small in the silence. He walked deeper between the trees. Step by step, the forest swallowed the light quickly. Even though the sun was high above the canopy, the ground below remained dim and shadowed. The branches above tangled together so tightly that the sky could barely be seen. Min checked his watch. It was only noon. Yet the forest already felt like late evening. As he moved deeper, a strange feeling slowly crept into his mind. The unsettling sense that the forest was not empty. It felt occupied, not by animals, but by something else. Something quiet, something patient. Min suddenly stopped walking. For a brief moment, he had the unmistakable feeling that someone was standing somewhere behind him. Very close. Watching. He listened carefully. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. Only the thick, unnatural silence of the forest. Min forced himself to keep moving. But he didn't notice one thing. Deep in the shadows between the trees behind him, something had started following. Chapter 6. The First Voice. By late afternoon, the forest had grown darker. Min walked for several hours before finally reaching a small clearing between the trees. It wasn't large, just enough open space to set up a small camp for the night. A fallen tree lay across one side of the clearing, its bark covered in moss, as if it had been there for many years. Min checked the position on his GPS. He was already deeper in the forest than most villagers ever dared to go. The silence here felt heavier than before, almost suffocating. He placed his backpack on the ground and began setting up a small tent. The routine helped calm his thoughts, unfolding the fabric, securing the poles, arranging his equipment carefully nearby. Soon, a small fire crackled gently in front of him. The faint orange light pushed the shadows a little farther away, but not very far. Beyond the circle of firelight, the forest remained dark and unmoving. Min sat on a log and opened his notebook. Day 1, evening, he wrote. No wildlife observed, no birds, no insects. The silence here is unnatural. A faint chill ran along his arms. He glanced around the clearing. The trees stood tall and silent like silent watchers. Min shook his head and returned to writing. Then he heard it. A voice. Soft. Barely louder than a whisper. Min. His hand froze. For a moment, he thought it might be the wind. But there had been no wind in the forest since he entered. Slowly, Min lifted his head. The fire crackled quietly beside him. Nothing else moved. He listened carefully. Several seconds passed. Then the voice came again. Min. This time it sounded closer. Not far away in the forest, but somewhere behind him. Min turned quickly. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness between the trees. Empty. Only trunks. Branches. Shadows. His heart began beating faster. Hello? Min called cautiously. His voice echoed faintly between the trees, then disappeared. No answer came. Min stood up slowly, scanning the forest with his light. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just the same unnatural silence. After several long moments, he exhaled slowly. Maybe it had been his imagination. Maybe the quiet of the forest was beginning to play tricks on his mind. He returned to the fire and sat down again. But as he stared into the flames, a strange thought crept into his mind. The voice had sounded familiar. Very familiar. As if it belonged to someone he knew. Someone he had heard many times before. Min tried to ignore the thought. He didn't notice that deep within the trees behind him, something had quietly moved closer. And it had learned his name.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Footsteps Around the Tent. Min did not sleep that night. The forest was too quiet. At first, he tried to convince himself that exhaustion would eventually take over. After hours of walking through the dense woods, his body should have been tired enough to rest. But every time he closed his eyes, the memory of that whisper returned. Min. The voice had sounded too clear to be imagination. The small fire in front of his tent slowly burned lower as the night deepened. Shadows stretched longer across the clearing, twisting between the trees like dark fingers reaching inward. Min checked his watch. 2:03 a.m. The forest outside the faint glow of the dying fire looked completely black, as if the darkness itself had weight. He was sitting inside the tent, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, a sound. Crunch. Min froze. It was faint but unmistakable. The sound of a foot pressing slowly onto dry leaves. Crunch. Another step. Min held his breath. The footsteps were outside the tent, moving slowly, carefully. Crunch. Crunch. Each step circled the clearing with unnatural patience. Min grabbed his flashlight. The beam of light trembled slightly as he held it. Maybe it's an animal, he told himself. But deep inside, he already knew something was wrong. Animals move quickly. These footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was outside didn't want to leave. Crunch. The sound came closer to the tent. Min could almost feel the presence just beyond the thin fabric. Then the footsteps stopped. Complete silence returned. Min waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing. His heart pounded against his chest. Finally, he reached forward and slowly unzipped the tent. The cold night air slipped inside. Min stepped out and immediately raised the flashlight. The beam swept across the clearing. Empty. The trees stood silent. The fire had nearly died. There was no one there. Min exhaled slowly. But when he lowered the light to the ground, something made his blood turn cold. Footprints. They circled the tent completely. Fresh. Clearly human. Dozens of them. Min crouched down to examine one. The shape was unmistakable. Bare human feet. But something about them felt wrong. Min moved the flashlight closer. And then he saw it. Every single footprint pointed in the wrong direction. The toes faced toward the tent. But the heel marks were in front. As if whoever had walked around his camp had been walking backward the entire time. Min slowly stood up again. The forest around him remained silent. But now he understood something terrifying. Whatever had been walking outside his tent had been facing him the whole time. Evergreen Tree. Chapter 8. A familiar voice. Morning came slowly in the forest. Min barely noticed when the sky began to brighten above the trees. The night had passed in a blur of tension and restless waiting. Even after the strange footprints appeared, he never dared to sleep. At some point, the fire had burned out completely. Now only gray ashes remained. Thin beams of pale sunlight filtered weakly through the dense canopy overhead, creating faint streaks of light across the clearing. The forest looked almost normal again. Almost. Min packed his equipment in silence. The footprints around the tent were still there. Clear. Undeniable. He photographed them carefully before covering the spot with fallen leaves. Something inside him didn't want to keep staring at them for too long. After a quick breakfast, Min continued deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser as he walked. Their trunks seemed older, thicker, and twisted into strange shapes that almost resembled frozen figures standing between the shadows. The deeper he went, the darker it became. By midday, the air had grown colder. Min paused near a narrow path where the roots of several trees had grown across the ground like tangled veins. That was when he heard it. A voice. Soft, clear, and very familiar. Min, turn around. His entire body stiffened instantly. The voice was behind him. Very close. Min felt his pulse hammer in his ears. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The voice came again. Gentle. Warm. Exactly the way he remembered it. Min, it's okay. You can turn around. His hands began to tremble. Because he recognized the voice. It was his mother's voice. But that was impossible. His mother had died 3 years ago in a hospital far away from this forest. Min's throat tightened. Min. The voice sounded closer now. Almost directly behind his shoulder. Why won't you look at me? For a brief moment, instinct nearly took over. Every part of him wanted to turn. Just one glance. Just to confirm. But another memory forced its way into his mind. His grandfather sitting on the porch long ago. The warning. If someone calls your name in the forest, never look back. Min slowly clenched his fists. Cold sweat rolled down the side of his face. The voice behind him grew softer. Almost sad. Min, don't you recognize me? The forest around him remained silent. Waiting. Listening. Min shut his eyes tightly. And refused to turn around.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Rules of the Forest. Min stood frozen on the narrow forest path. The voice behind him slowly faded into silence. For a long moment, he didn't move. His heart pounded violently in his chest. And cold sweat covered the back of his neck. Every instinct inside him screamed to turn around. To look. To confirm whether what he had heard was real. But he forced himself to stay still. Slowly. Carefully. Min took a step forward. Then another. The moment he moved away, the forest seemed to breathe again. The strange pressure that had surrounded him loosened slightly, though the silence still hung heavily between the trees. Min kept walking. He didn't dare look back. Not even once. After several minutes, he finally stopped beside a large fallen tree. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his notebook. He needed to think. Needed to understand. Min stared down at the blank page for a moment before writing a single sentence. There are rules in this forest. He remembered something the old hunter had said the previous day. At the time, Min had dismissed it as superstition. Now he wasn't so sure. The hunter had spoken about 3 rules that everyone in the village knew. Min wrote them down slowly. Rule 1. Never call another person's name after sunset. Rule 2. Never walk too deep into the forest alone. Rule 3. If you hear someone call your name, never turn around. Min stared at the words. Until now, he had believed the rules were meant to protect villagers from getting lost or frightened in the woods. But what if the rules were not about safety? What if they were about survival? Min suddenly realized something else. The thing in the forest had never tried to attack him. It had never touched him. It had only done one thing. Called his name. Again and again. As if that alone was enough. Min slowly looked around at the silent trees. A terrible thought began forming in his mind. Maybe whatever lived in this forest couldn't harm people directly. Maybe it couldn't step in front of them. Maybe it couldn't even show itself. Unless... He swallowed slowly. Unless someone looked at it first. Min felt a chill crawl down his spine. That was the trap. The voice. The familiar voices. The whispers behind your back. They were not meant to scare you. They were meant to make you turn around. Because the moment you did, you would finally see what was standing behind you. And once you saw it, you would never leave the forest again. Evergreen Tree. Chapter 10. The place where things are left behind. Min continued walking deeper into the forest. The path had long since disappeared. Now there were only tangled roots, thick moss, and uneven ground beneath his boots. The trees here looked older than the ones closer to the village, massive trunks twisted into strange shapes. Their bark cracked like ancient stone. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the forest had grown denser the farther he went. Min checked his GPS again. The signal flickered weakly, then disappeared. He sighed quietly and placed the device back into his bag. Technology rarely worked well inside dense forests. But something about the sudden loss of signal still made him uneasy. After another 20 minutes of walking, Min noticed something unusual ahead. The trees suddenly opened into a small clearing. Unlike the one where he had camped the previous night, this clearing felt different. Wrong. The ground here was uneven and strangely disturbed, as if many people had passed through the area over the years. Min stepped forward slowly. Then he saw the objects scattered across the clearing. Old things. Abandoned things. A rusted hunting knife half buried in the dirt. A broken flashlight. Pieces of torn fabric caught on low branches. An old backpack covered in mold. Min's stomach tightened. These weren't random objects. They belonged to people. People who had entered the forest and never returned. He knelt beside one of the items, a small handheld camera. Scratched but still intact. Carefully, he wiped away the dirt covering the lens. The battery inside was dead, but after replacing it with one from his bag, the screen flickered weakly to life. Min pressed play. The camera displayed a shaky video. A man appeared on the screen. He looked exhausted, terrified. His face was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot as he held the camera toward himself. Behind him were the same dark trees. The same forest. His voice trembled. If anyone finds this, don't listen to the voice. The man glanced nervously over his shoulder. Min's chest tightened. Because the man in the video had made the same mistake. He looked back. Only for a brief moment. but long enough for the camera to capture something standing behind him. The image was blurry, distorted, but there was definitely a shape there. Tall, unnaturally thin, standing between the trees. The man's breathing became faster. "It keeps calling my name," he whispered. The camera shook violently as he stumbled backward. "It knows everything, my family, my memories." The man's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "It sounds like people I love." He paused. His eyes slowly widened. The man's lips trembled. And then he said something that made Min's blood run cold. "It's standing behind me right now." The video suddenly ended. Min slowly lowered the camera. The forest around him remained silent. But the clearing suddenly felt much smaller. Because Min had realized something. This place was where the forest kept the things people left behind. After they turned around.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. Figures in the Mist. The clearing felt colder after Min finished watching the video. He carefully turned the camera off and placed it back on the ground where he had found it. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening to the forest around him. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. But the silence now felt different. Heavier. As if the forest had become aware of him. Min tightened the straps on his backpack and began walking again. Staying too long in that clearing made his skin crawl. The abandoned objects scattered across the ground felt like silent warnings from people who had come before him. People who had not escaped. The deeper he walked, the thicker the air seemed to become. The trees stood closer together now, their branches intertwining high above like a tangled ceiling that blocked most of the remaining daylight. Then something strange began to appear. Mist. At first it was only a thin layer near the ground, sliding slowly between the roots of the trees. But within minutes it began to thicken, spreading through the forest like a pale curtain. Min slowed his pace. His flashlight beam cut through the fog in a narrow line, but the light seemed weaker than before. The forest looked distorted, unreal. Shadows stretched and shifted inside the mist. Min wiped the moisture from his forehead and kept moving forward. Then he saw the first figure. At first he thought it was a tree stump. But as the fog shifted, the shape became clearer. It looked like a person, standing between two trees about 20 meters ahead. Min stopped walking. The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still, facing away from him. Min slowly raised his flashlight. The beam reached the figure. It was definitely human-shaped. Tall, thin, but the light only revealed its back. The figure did not turn. Min swallowed slowly. "Hello?" he called cautiously. His voice disappeared into the mist. The figure didn't respond. Then Min noticed something else. There was another figure, further to the left, and another, and another. As the fog shifted around the trees, more shapes slowly revealed themselves. 5, 10, maybe more. All of them standing between the trees. All perfectly still. And every single one of them was facing away from him. Min's heart began pounding again. The forest had felt empty before, but now it felt crowded, as if the trees were hiding an entire group of silent watchers. Then something even stranger happened. One of the figures moved. Slowly. Not turning its body, but its head. Very slowly. The head began to tilt sideways, as if trying to listen. And then, from somewhere inside the mist, voices began to whisper. Soft. Familiar. All at once. Men. The figures still stood facing away. But the voices kept coming. Men. 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 Min felt a cold wave of terror run through his body. Because now he understood something horrifying. None of the figures had turned around. Which meant, whatever was calling his name was not standing in front of him. It was still somewhere behind him. Evergreen Tree. Chapter 12. The breath behind him. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The forest returned to silence. But the figures in the mist were still there. Min forced himself to keep moving forward. Every instinct inside him told him to run. But he knew that panic could make him forget the most important rule. Never turn around. The mist thickened as he walked. The shapes between the trees slowly faded until they were no longer visible, swallowed by the pale fog. Soon, Min found himself alone again. Or at least, that was what he tried to believe. Night came faster than he expected. The forest darkened quickly once the sunlight disappeared behind the thick canopy above. By the time Min found another small clearing to rest, the sky was already invisible through the branches. He didn't dare build a large fire. Just a small one. Barely enough to see the ground around him. Min sat on a fallen log and stared into the weak flames. His body was exhausted from walking, but his mind refused to relax. Every sound made his heart jump. Every movement of shadow felt suspicious. The forest was waiting. He could feel it. Min checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. The exact same hour he had heard the footsteps the previous night. A cold breeze slipped through the clearing. Then it came. A sound behind him. Very soft. Like something stepping slowly onto the ground. Min froze. His eyes remained fixed on the fire in front of him. He didn't turn. He didn't move. Another step. Closer. The leaves behind him shifted slightly. Crunch. Min's breathing became shallow. The presence was now only a few steps away. He could feel it. The cold air behind his back grew heavier. Then something even worse happened. He heard breathing. Slow. Cold. Right behind his neck. The breath touched his skin. Min's entire body trembled. He knew something was standing there. Something tall enough to lean over him. Something watching him from only a few centimeters away. Then a whisper came. So close that it felt like the voice was inside his ear. Min. The voice was gentle. Almost affectionate. Why won't you look at me? Min clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. The whisper continued. I've been following you all day. The breath grew colder. You know who I am. The fire crackled weakly in front of him. Behind him, the presence leaned closer. The whisper came again. Soft. Patient. Min. Just turn around. The forest waited. Everything waited. Because whatever stood behind him knew one thing. All humans eventually make the same mistake. They look back,
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. What lives between the trees? Min did not turn around. Even though every muscle in his body screamed for him to move. He stayed perfectly still. The cold breath behind his neck remained there for several long seconds. Hovering in the darkness like a patient predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. The fire crackled weakly in front of him. The whisper did not return. Slowly, the presence behind him began to fade. The cold air lifted from his skin. The breathing disappeared. Min remained frozen for nearly a full minute before he finally dared to move. Carefully, he added another small branch to the fire. The flames grew slightly brighter, pushing the darkness back just enough for him to breathe again. But sleep never came. The rest of the night passed in silence. When dawn finally arrived, Min felt like he had aged years in a single night. The fog had vanished, and the forest looked strangely calm again. Pale sunlight filtered through the branches above, illuminating the ground in scattered patches. Min packed his equipment slowly. His mind replayed everything that had happened since he entered the forest. The voices, the footprints, the figures in the mist, the breathing behind him, and a terrifying pattern began to form. The thing in the forest had never attacked him. It had never touched him. It had never stepped in front of him. It had only stayed behind him, calling his name, trying to make him turn around. Min began walking again, but his thoughts grew heavier with every step. Eventually he reached a part of the forest where the trees grew unusually far apart. The ground there was covered in thick moss, soft enough to muffle every sound. And that was when he saw something that made him stop. Marks. Hundreds of them. Deep scratches carved into the bark of several trees. Min stepped closer. At first, he thought they might be claw marks from animals. But when he looked carefully, he realized they formed shapes. Words. Messages carved by many different hands over many different years. Most of them were short. Desperate. Don't turn around. It's behind you. Keep walking. Min felt his throat tighten. Then he saw something else carved deeper into one of the trees. A longer message. The letters were rough but clear. It has no face. It has no body. It only exists when you look at it. Min stared at the message. His mind slowly pieced the truth together. The thing in the forest was not a ghost. Not a creature. Not something with a physical form. It was something else. Something that existed between the spaces of the forest. Something that needed a human gaze to become real. And that was why it called their names. That was why it used familiar voices. That was why it stayed behind them. Because the moment someone turned around, the moment their eyes met whatever was waiting behind them, it would finally exist. And once it existed, it would never let them leave. Evergreen Tree. Chapter 14. The Last Voice. By the time the sun began to set, Min had been walking for hours. He no longer tried to explore deeper into the forest. The moment he understood the truth carved into the trees, he made only one decision: leave. The forest had already taken too many people, and Min had come closer to its trap than he ever intended. The path back toward the village was not clear, but he remembered the direction of the sun from earlier that day. If he kept moving south, he should eventually reach the outer edge of the woods. At least, that was the plan. But the forest did not make it easy. The deeper shadows returned as evening approached. The tangled branches above swallowed the last light of the sky. And soon the forest began to look exactly as it had the previous nights, dark, silent, and endless. Min walked faster. The sooner he left this place, the better. Then the voices returned. At first, it was only faint whispers between the trees. Soft, barely audible. Min. He clenched his jaw and kept walking. The whisper followed him. Min. Another voice joined it. Then another. Soon the forest seemed filled with distant echoes of his name. But Min did not stop. He did not turn. The voices changed. They grew clearer, more familiar. He heard the voice of the old hunter. Min, wait. Then the voice of Ba Lan. Child, you're going the wrong way. Min shut his eyes briefly and continued forward. He knew the forest was trying one last time. Trying to make him forget the rule. Trying to make him turn around. The whispers slowly faded. For a moment, the forest became silent again. Then a final voice appeared. Soft. Weak. A voice he had not heard in many years. Min. His steps slowed. The voice trembled slightly. Grandson. Min felt his chest tighten. It was his grandfather. The same voice he remembered from the porch long ago. The same calm, gentle tone. Min, it's me. His legs nearly stopped moving. The voice came again. Closer. Almost right behind him. You've walked far enough. A pause. Then the whisper softened. You can look now. Min's eyes filled with tears. For one terrifying moment, he almost forgot everything. The rules. The warnings. The truth carved into the trees. All of it. He wanted to see his grandfather again. Just once. The voice came one last time. Min. Turn around. Min slowly closed his eyes. And kept walking forward. Because he finally understood something. If his grandfather truly loved him, he would never ask him to turn around in that forest. Evergreen tree.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Ones Who Never Turn Back. The trees slowly began to thin. At first, Min wasn't sure if it was real or just another illusion created by the forest. The shadows between the trunks looked slightly lighter, and the air no longer felt as heavy as before. He kept walking, step after step. Not once did he look behind him. The voices had stopped. The whispers were gone. Only the sound of his own breathing remained. Then, suddenly, the trees ended. Min stepped out of the forest and onto the edge of the open field. The sky above him was pale with early morning light. The village stood in the distance, quiet and peaceful as if nothing strange had ever existed in the forest behind him. Min collapsed to his knees on the grass. For several seconds he simply breathed, letting the cold morning air fill his lungs. He had made it out. He was alive. And most importantly, he had never turned around. Hours later, villagers found him sitting at the edge of the forest, staring silently at the ground. Some recognized him immediately. The grandson of Old Tan. the man who had gone into the northern forest alone. They helped him back to the village. But Min rarely spoke after that. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood something the others did not. Every now and then, people asked him the same question. What's really inside that forest? Min never answered directly. He would only say one thing. There's nothing in front of you. Then he would pause before adding quietly. It's always behind you. Years passed. The legend of the forest slowly grew again as new people heard the story. Parents warned their children. Hunters repeated the rule before entering the trees. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind moved through the forest, some villagers claimed they heard voices between the trees, calling names. Soft, familiar, patient. Min knew the truth. The forest never chased people. It never needed to. All it had to do was wait. Because sooner or later, someone would hear their name. And eventually, someone would turn around. Evergreen tree. Some people say the forest is empty. That there's nothing there but trees, shadows, and the wind. But the villagers who live near that place know better. Because sometimes, on very quiet nights, when the forest is completely still, you might hear something whispering between the trees. A voice that sounds strangely familiar. Calling a name. Your name. And if that ever happens, remember the rule. Keep walking. And whatever you do, never look back. Evergreen Tree Eye.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.